Okay, viewers, you need to look at the motive behind what this man's saying. Just before we start, this is Egyptian-born Muslim, immigrant, Western Sydney councillor. This is one of Tony Burke's guys. Ahmed Oof, who's launched an attack on Australia Day, calling it the beginning of a Holocaust, and saying January 26th should not be celebrated. I'm not sure who he thinks he is, but it was definitely a massacre. He's going to come up with a 90% figure of First Nations people killed. Just let me remind you, I am a Lebanese Aboriginal descent. Aboriginal European descent. My grandmother was Aboriginal, my grandfather was Lebanese. On my that's on my father's side, my mother's side was European. He's going to come up with a figure of 90% of Aboriginals killed in colonist massacres, but that's not correct. The 90% figure usually refers to overall population decline after colonisation, mainly introduced diseases plus dispossession and other impacts, not 90% killed by colonists in violence. But just let me say, 90% is not a good number. 1% is not a good number. For documented massacre killings by colonists, the University of Newcastle's Colonial Frontier Massacres Project lists 10,374 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander victims. That's massacres only. If you compare that to common pre-contact population estimates of 300 to 750,000 First Nations people on the land, that's roughly 1.4% to 3.5% from the massacres alone. And it's still not, and it's far from 90%. Why do you see 90% talked about as the total killings in some of the records, and as in this case, Egyptian-born Muslim immigrant Western Sydney councillor Ahmed Oof? Well, local epidemics could wipe out huge proportions of specific groups. For example, up to 90% is often discussed for some local communities and early outbreaks. And let me say, this is started by the colonists and their diseases, and sometimes this generalises that the whole continent was almost wiped out by disease. So there's a lot to it. It's not, just someone getting up there and spruiking what they think. There's a lot going on here. But if you said 2 to 4% were massacred, it's still not justifiable in any way. It's not something you can legitimize. It's a massacre. But you have to be very careful how you answer these questions and how you're going to advertise yourself as an advocate of the beginning of Australia as we know it. So you can estimate with some honesty that the overall population collapse from 1788 to 1900 gives us that multiple sources put the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander population decline after the British colonisation at roughly 80 to 90% by 1900, driven mostly by introduced infectious disease plus dispossession, starvation, disruption and violence. And that comes from the Yearbook Australia 2008. Then number 2, deaths from direct colonial violence or massacres, killed by colonists or police or whoever took it upon themselves to do it. There's no complete count, but there is 2 commonly cited benchmarks. Number 1, at least 10,374 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people killed in documented massacres events meeting the project's threshold in the University of Newcastle's massacre mapping work, as reported in 2025 coverage. And the broader historical estimates often cite around 20,000 killed in frontier conflict massacres across roughly the 1790s to 1930s. So turning that into a rough percentage with big warnings, this is just estimates. If you use a common pre-contact population estimate of say 770,000 and a 1900s low of 93 to 117,000, say 120,000, the implied loss is about 650 to 680 people. And that comes from the Bureau of Statistics. That's a lot of people. That's nearly 750,000 people. So if we use the violence estimates above, 10,374 from 650 to 680,000 equals 1.5%. And if you go of 20,000 from 650 to 680,000 First Nations people, that's 3%. So a defensible ballpark is 1.5 to 3% of the overall population collapse being directly connected to or recording as killings or massacres or slaughters, with the rest primarily from disease and the cascading effects of the colonisation. And that's from the University of Technology, Sydney. So why this is still messy, and I don't think the way this man approaches it is to unite anybody. It just seems to me like he's got a vendetta, and he needs to be checked because he's a councillor down in Western Sydney, one of Tony Burke's people. Well, this is still messy because the 80-90% decline isn't a death certificate count. It includes undercounting, right? There can be some undercounting in this, fertility collapse, displacement, and missing records. That's from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. The massacre map is not all killings. It has a definition threshold and depends on surviving evidence. And that's from The Guardian. More than 10,000 First Nations people killed in Australia's frontier wars. Final massacre map shows. Pre-contact population estimates vary widely, hundreds of thousands to millions, which changes percentages a lot, but that's a Wikipedia source. The best one-line answer is overall collapse 80 to 90% by 1900. Direct killings by colonists, police, and plausible other people that took upon themselves account for something like 1.5 to 3% of that collapse, using common population baselines, with disease doing most of the lethal damage. So that's trying to give you a fair perspective of the horror that come on my ancestors and the First Nation people. But as a First Nations person, and knowing the trauma and the atrocities and the horror of it all, from stories from my cousins and the people that are out there still in Coonamble and other parts of New South Wales, I don't think it's fair the way this man's done this, and I don't think it's necessary. Let's see.
The Australian Holocaust began on 26th of January 1788. At that time, Australia was home to around 1 million Aboriginal people. These were stable societies that lived for tens of thousands of years. What followed was catastrophic: massacres, genocide, forced removals, ethnic cleansing, introduced disease, the destruction of land, food systems, families, and culture. By early 1800, the population had already collapsed from 1 million to around 600,000. As colonization expanded throughout the mid-1800s, the numbers fell again. By 1901, only around 90,000 Aboriginal people remained. Less than 10% of the original population. More than 9 out of 10 were wiped out. People who lived here for tens of thousands of years peacefully and in balance with nature.
Now we have to stop it there. We have to stop it there because it wasn't that peaceful, viewers. The tribal wars were pretty fierce. There was a lot of death amongst the Aboriginals. Yeah, there was some pretty bad murders and things going on amongst themselves. We can't make out that they were just all peaceful. They were natives, don't forget. Let's just not get this messed up. They had massacres amongst themselves as well. We all know that as First Nations people, and that's part of life. But no, we're not going to butter this up to the point where they were just walking around like innocent people doing nothing. They had to survive, and sometimes territory wars were a part of that. So there was violence amongst the tribes as well. There was a lot of murder and killings going on as well. That wasn't the whole crux of it, but let's not be ignorant of that either. So no, we're not going to fluff this up like they were just walking around, hippies walking around, peace, love and all the rest of it. These First Nations people were survivalists, and there were turf wars amongst the mobs. You have to understand they were natives, and that was part of survival.
This isn't about asking you to apologize for something you didn't do.
The Aboriginals will never apologise to the colonists, never, and they've never thought that. So this is where Ahmed has gotten way off track. I'm not sure what message he's trying to send. Is he trying to I don't know how many Aboriginal people live out amongst the Muslims in Western Sydney, but there's no alliance between the Muslims and the Aboriginals in the real sense of it, because in the Middle East, the mob wars over there were going on for millenniums and still do. The tribal wars and the tribal values and conflicts and enmities were going on for years, but it was a completely different aggression to the Aboriginal ones via the numbers and the millenniums of recorded conflicts in the Middle East. We haven't got the millennium records of the natives in Australia, and they only go back, as they say, as far as 60,000 years. I don't know how you can work that out. But to me, the Muslim war, well, the Arab aggressions, because Muhammad only, the Muslim cult only started in this early 600 AD. The Christians and all the rest of it were well established before Muhammad come along and was poisoned to death by a Jewish woman because they didn't like him. And in the Quran, just out of a matter of fact, seeing as this guy's Muslim, it's written that Allah will cut the aorta of Muhammad if he gives false revelation in the Quran, of which he apparently did on multiple occasions. And at the time of Muhammad's death, he confessed that he confessed what he had done, because he said, I feel like my aorta is being cut, which was a personal confession saying, really, I'm sorry about all the lies I've told, and somebody needs to realize that, right? By saying that he felt like his aorta was being cut, was aligning himself with the promise that Allah made to kill him if he lied. Of course, the Muslims aren't going to agree with that, but that's in black and white. Now, I'm not sure what this man's motive is. I don't agree with it as a part First Nations person, but Oh, well, he must be getting some satisfaction out of it. I just don't think it's healthy given the state that the country's in at the moment, the apparent unity that the government's trying to make, and I just think it's gaslighting. I just can't see how this is constructive at all. I'm sorry, Mr. Ahmed.
It's about telling the truth, because the truth is the foundation of justice.
Now, the truth is the foundation of justice, but the truth is already known. Now, if people are willing to want to go and put time into spreading that, well, they can do it, but they don't have to do it because of Australia Day. I think Anthony Mundine had the right idea. Let's look at Pauline Hanson talking to Anthony Mundine and seeing what they thought might be, and I agree, the best way to have Australia Day. Now, this is an interview Jackie O is having, Kyle and Jackie O show, with Pauline Hanson and Anthony Mundine, and this part of the segment to me made a lot of sense, and it's worth thought because it's very constructive. Just hear it out and see what your thoughts are.
The convicts that came here, they were dragged away from their own country. They were brought here. Do we acknowledge the people that come from the convict background? Do they say, the way that our parents were treated?
They were misfits, man. They were misfits. They didn't want them over there in England. You know what I mean? They wanted to bring them out here.
That's history.
And that's exactly right what Anthony Mundine just said then. The convicts were misfits. They couldn't integrate into society, and that's what the Palestinian people are having in the Middle East. The Muslim countries surrounding Palestine will not accept the Palestinian people because they've been culturalized into believing that Jews need to be annihilated. They're misfits. They've become misfits by way of culture, by way of mindset. Continuing on.
That is history, Anthony. And until we move on and say, oh, that's past, it's like me. I was in prison wrongly. I can't keep going back and feel sorry for myself and play the victim. I have to say, that's happened to me, move on, and I pick up the pieces.
But you can't move on with this. Like, this is going to happen every year it's going to happen. You know what I mean? It's going to create more division. We want to bring people together.
But do you think that if we were brought together in the morning to pay respects, will it end there? Is Pauline right that just won't even solve that issue anyway?
You're killing two birds with one stone. You know, you give the blackfellas what they deservedly would like, and then you get all the Australians what they want in the afternoon where we celebrate the new Australia. You know
So Anthony Mundine's idea is absolutely brilliant, and I don't mind it. Have the memorial in the morning on Australia Day, right, acknowledging the First Nations people. Acknowledge them, give them the respect that they deserve for the atrocities that they suffered at the hands of the colonists. Everybody stop in the morning up till lunchtime or whatever and give credence and acknowledgement and respect and apology again each year to the First Nations people, to my ancestors as well, First Nations. And then in the afternoon, let Australia be a united colony and have Australia Day. I think that is the most brilliant answer I have ever heard to solve this problem, because it all happens on the same day and everybody gets the respect they deserve for the way Australia was and how it's turned out. Now, it may not suit everybody, but I think it's a pretty fair idea. I'll just let this go a little bit further. If it gets off topic, I'll stop it.
I feel like it's just, I get what you're saying, Pauline. There is never going to be a solution where everyone is happy. But I think as Australians, we want to be able to celebrate this country because it is such a wonderful country. We know how lucky we are to live here. But we do, like, there are a lot of people like myself and Brooklyn, I don't know about you, Pete, but we do feel like, oh, we don't want to do that because I don't want to disrespect what, the Aboriginal people have been through and that history. And I just think it would be a really nice kind of compromise to go, hey, I actually want to pay my respects to that. You know, I'd be happy to do that in the morning. Yeah. And then I feel 100%. Like we would all feel like Australia Day is recognising both how wonderful it is, but also the terrible things that happened.
That day,
Why are you staring at me like that?
Yes, well, Australia Day is definitely a very sensitive subject, but I think it should be given some thought, respect and honour and apologise to the First Nations people in the morning, and then accept the way that Australia is now in the afternoon and make that Australia Day. Maybe you should comment. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But it's no good being in division and all the rest of it over it. We may as well get it right. Come to some kind of halfway point and be happy with that. Let the First Nations people fully heal and move forward and try and make this place great again. But coming back to our Western Sydney Muslim man, I'm not sure why he's done that. Maybe he feels better about himself, but we don't anymore, excuse me, divisiveness. This is Count Straight. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.